Shalom, my friends. Parshat Vayigash, Tafshin Ayin Pei. Rav Itzel Levorka is traveling with his students to a different town. They load their baggages up on the train, and they begin the journey. They're talking in Torah the whole way. Finally, the train comes to its stop. They disembark from the train, and there's an entourage of people over there waiting to greet the Rebbe. As they're greeting the Rebbe, lo and behold, toot-toot, the train totally just leaves and takes off before they're able to take off their baggage, before they're able to take any of their stuff out. And the Hasidim start yelling, stop, 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 the Rebbe's things, stop, stop, stop. And the Rebbe, calm, not getting ruffled at all. And they turn to him and they say, Rebbe, all your stuff, you just lost all your stuff. And he turns to them and he says, no, I didn't lose anything. No, Rebbe, you don't understand. Your bags were on the bottom. We didn't take them off. You just lost everything. And again, he says, no, I didn't lose anything. So they're like perplexed. What do you mean? And he says, when I put my bags on the train, I never expected to get them back. And so if they would come back to me, I would have been surprised. What a pleasant gift. And the fact that they didn't, I never expected them back in the first place. And so therefore, I have no pain as if I lost something. So it's an incredible way to live life where I don't expect things to happen. And since I didn't expect them to happen, I'm not ruffled when they don't. But it does seem a little bit contradictory to the way we're used to thinking about life when we talk about having big dreams and big goals and wanting a lot and dreaming for a lot and expecting a lot. So what's the answer? Do I set my expectations very low so that I'll just be pleasantly surprised with whatever happens to me? Or do I dream big and want more and ask Hashem for everything? And I think that that's very much part of this tightrope balance that we walk in life. And it's exactly this inner conflict that brings us to a place of confusion. I could settle for less if that's what Hashem wants me to, but is that what Hashem wants me to? Aren't I supposed to have more? Shouldn't I have high expectations, or should I not have high expectations? So let's try a little bit tonight to navigate how we deal with confusion in our lives, how we deal with expectations in our lives, and how we create a mindset that's going to give us a sense of happiness and serenity and calmness. So when Yosef HaTzadik is in Mitzrayim, he's the king. His brothers have come down a few times already. And at this point now, Yehuda, Vayigash Yehuda. Yehuda says, whatever has happened up until now, I'm not going to make a mistake anymore. I am ready to stand up to this non-Jewish ruler, and I am ready to rip him apart and rip his whole country apart for the honor of my brother. And just as he approaches Yosef and he's ready to fight with him, Yosef can no longer hold himself back. He sends everybody out and he tells his brothers, Ani Yosef, I am Yosef. And how do the brothers react? V'lo yachlu la'anoto. They couldn't answer him. Ki nivhalu mipanav. Because they were overwhelmed, confused by seeing his face. What do you mean they were overwhelmed? Says Rashi, because when they sold him, he didn't have a beard. And now he has a beard. So they didn't recognize his face. What does this mean? How was it possible that the brothers didn't recognize Yosef? How could they have not identified him? How could they? There were so many hints, so many clues. Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky brings down that when the Chassam Sofer, a famous great rabbi, when he was 13 years old, he left Preshburg and he traveled to a city called Minsk in France, and he wanted to study in the yeshiva over there. While he was in the yeshiva over there, he dormed by a very wealthy person who lived in the area. And it happened to be that at the same time he was dorming over there, there was another young man dorming, but he was a French student for the university, and they crossed paths here and there. They were living in the same house. They were both from the rich man receiving from him. But the Chassam Sofer was in yeshiva, and this French student was in university. Anyhow, the years went on. The Chassam Sofer returns back to Frankfurt, and he becomes the great Rav over there. And 35 years later, the strong armies of Napoleon are blazing through Austria, and there is a battle in which the French are ambushed, and two Jews see a bunch of French soldiers lying in the battlefield, and what they do is they go and they run and they take all of the neshek, all of the weaponry off of these French soldiers, and they're looking to make a buck. So they sell it to the Austrian army, they sell it to the enemy army. At the end of the day, the Jews are not in any one country. They're just looking to see how they're going to be able to benefit at the end of all of this. So these two Jews make this very shady business deal. They make a lot of money from it. And when there's a lot of money, there's also a lot of questions and troubles. And these two Jews begin to fight with each other. Dine Mamanos, who owes which money, how much this one gets, how much that one gets, this one put his life more at risk. And they bring a din Torah to the Chatam Sofer. They bring a din Torah to this great rabbi. And he listens to both their sides, and the Chassam Sofer paskins for the first guy. He's the winner. Well, the loser is not very happy with this psak. He's not very happy with how it came out, and he's angry. And he decides that he is going to take revenge. And so he goes to the French authorities, and he tells the French authorities, this and this guy, the first guy who won the Din Torah, he sold weapons from the French soldiers, the dead French soldiers. He sold them to the Austrian army. You know what? He did it with the backing of the rabbi in our town. So of course, this is treason at its highest level. They waste no time in seizing the man and in seizing the Chassam Sofer, the great rabbi. They're brought for a trial to which they're going to be sentenced to death. And actually, side point, I read something. What are the two worst sentences that you can get in a court? Life and death. Yeah, a life sentence is you're imprisoned for life, and a death sentence is death. But it's interesting how life and death are both the two worst sentences that you can get. Anyhow, so he is certainly going to be written off to an immediate and swift death. As the Av Beis Din, the judge, the French judge, walks in, he takes a look at the rabbi, and he says, I need to speak to this rabbi privately. He brings him to a room, and he says to him, Hatakireni, do you recognize me? And Chassam Sofer is looking at this French soldier, this French, judge, and not really. And he says, we lived together by this guy's house when you were studying in yeshiva, and I was studying in the university. And, your ways were always so wonderful. And I always enjoyed our conversations that we had. And he says, what's going on? How come you got involved in this dirty deal? And Chassam Sofer explains, no, we weren't involved. There was a different thing that happened, and it went sour, and this guy was malshin on us. He just said bad about us because he was angry about something that I said. I wasn't involved in this deal at all. And of course, the French judge lets him go. And this, he said, was a fulfillment of the pasuk, Ura'ita et achorai upanai lo yareu. When God tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you can see my back, but you can't see my face. Which means, says the Chassam Sofer, sometimes I can see God's hand in hindsight. I can see God me'achorai. Years later, I could see God's hands. Upanai lo yareu. When I was dorming next to this French student, I never thought that this would one day save my life. Ura'it et achorai. But in hindsight, I see that God was already setting it up for me. He was already setting up the refuah for me. But here's the question. This French soldier recognized this rabbi 35 years later. He was a young boy when they knew each other. He recognized him like that 35 years later. How was it possible the brothers didn't recognize Yosef? And more than that, we know that Yosef gave them a plethora of clues to indicate or to arouse their suspicions when they imprisoned Shimon. So he says Shimon needs to be imprisoned. And of course, Shimon's strength is a godly strength. 70 of the strongest Egyptian soldiers could not contain Shimon. So Yosef gives a little wink to his son Menashe and tells Menashe, get this under control. 70 of the strongest guards can't get Shimon under control. Menashe gives a little kick and boom, Shimon is subdued into submission. They didn't have a curiosity of, this is not regular Egyptian strength. This is strength mibeit Ava, from our father's home. No. They come back and Yosef says, I divine in my cup, and he begins to sit them in age order by their mothers. And he says, well, really, this one is a Bechor, but that one is a Bechor. And he sits them in age order. V'chashadam lo hitorer. And their suspicion wasn't aroused. More than that, they come back to their father and they tell their father, he told us all about this Egyptian ruler. He told us all about our childhood. Rashi says he even told us the kind of wood that our cribs were made out of. He told us childhood memories. V'chashadam lo hitorer. Their suspicion wasn't aroused. How come it never crossed their minds once that this was Yosef, that this was their brother? The brothers knew that there was a steadfast law in Egypt. And this law was that one who is a slave can never take a position of rulership, no matter what. And in fact, this was what all of Egypt was really based on, the hierarchy of slave and what happens as a slave. And the brothers said, we sold Yosef as a slave. And so therefore, there is no position of leadership that we're even going to look at him for. And perhaps they even thought to themselves, wow, this is, uncannily like Yosef. This is so eerie, but it definitely can't be Yosef because there is a rule. A slave can never be in a position of leadership. Even if they thought this might be Yosef, they immediately banished that thought from their heads because it can't be. In Egypt, there's a rule. A slave doesn't become a master. And what happened? When Yosef reveals himself, they couldn't answer him. Kiniv halumi panav. They were overwhelmed with confusion by his face. They were overwhelmed, guilty and downtrodden. They couldn't speak. They were speechless. And usually we learn it as because they felt so bad, because they were afraid what's Yosef going to do to them now. Usually we read this as they were overwhelmed because now they're facing their brother Yosef and they're thinking about Yosef, and that's what makes them overwhelmed. No, says Rav Yaakov Galinsky, that's not what threw them into this speechless trance. What did so was they realized immediately that they had put a boundary on God's power. And they were speechless because they were so disappointed in themselves that their level of emunah was such that they believed there's a law in Egypt. And we're going to just take that law as law because what do you mean? We're not going to stretch our emunah muscles to think, okay, so what if there is a law? Hashem can do anything. Therefore, if I see someone that might look like Yosef, but it's impossible, it can't be, maybe it is possible because everything for Hashem is possible. And so the brothers are stunned into silence because they realize how much more they have to grow in believing in God and in his infinite capacity. They were disappointed in themselves in putting boundaries on Hashem. In the time of Elisha, there was a terrible famine that was ravaging the Jewish camp. They were under siege by the enemies, and the money, basically, you would give all of the money and all of the gold and jewels that you had for a few grains of barley, for the head of a donkey, for its meat. It was a very dire situation for food. And it came to a point where it was so bad, and people had given up hope, and people were downtrodden. And Elisha gets up and he announces, Machar, tomorrow at this time, there will be an abundance of food. You will be able to buy a barrel of wheat for mere shkalim, for just a few coins. It's going to be an abundance of food. And one of the advisors to the king says, how exactly do you expect God to create something like that? He can't, there's no way that could happen tomorrow. I mean, if you want to tell me that eventually it's going to happen and now we're at a turning point, but by tomorrow already there's going to be storehouses of food available to the Jewish people, it simply can't be. And Elisha turns to this advisor and says to him, you will see it happen tomorrow, but you will not eat from it. And in fact, what happens in the Navi is that the enemy camp, there's confusion in the camp. They think that they're being attacked when really they're not. And they end up killing one the other. They kill out each other, leaving their camps completely empty. Though many of them were killed, the ones who weren't killed totally abandoned. And in the enemy camp, there were silos of food, storehouses of food, so much food. And the Jewish people, when they realize, oh my gosh, we're not going to starve to death. We can go, we can run, and we can eat the food. So this advisor of the king is standing at the sha'ar, he's standing at the gate, and he's trying to figure out, okay, wow, so now here's the opportunity. This is great, this is incredible. Really, the nevuah came true. Let me figure out what the best way to let these people through is. But there was no way to let these people through. Bnei Yisrael were starving. And so they began to push out of the sha'ar until, says the Navi, they trampled this advisor to death. And so his eyes saw, but his mouth didn't taste. And our Chachamim tell us that there is something very precious in learning how to remove the limits from Hashem. Hashem can do anything. Hayad Hashem tiktzar, not to bind God by any physical, natural means. If this one wins, then we're going to be doomed. If that one wins, then we're going to be doomed. Doesn't matter. This one, if we're going to be mandated to take it, we're not going to be mandated to take it. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. But it has to understand that Hashem can do anything, and to make sure that we give belief to that idea, that we really understand that idea, to believe it, be'emunah shalema, that Hashem is not limited. I read that in 2019, everybody was saying, gotta stay away from anyone who's negative, stay away from all kinds of negative energies, don't be near anything negative, don't go near anyone negative. And the motto of 2020 is stay away from anyone positive. 2020, it has turned itself over, that all of the things that we used to say are now upside down. But as Yidden, we're going to understand that we have to keep surrounding ourselves by positivity, and that we do have to keep shying away from negativity. And we see it in this week's parsha. We see it when Yaakov Avinu finally goes down to Egypt and Paro greets him. And we all know Paro says, oh, how are you? How old are you? And Yaakov Avinu goes on to explain, I'm very old. My years of my life were very few and very bad. And we all know, Chazal tell us that for every word of complaint that Yaakov uttered, that he was punished with a year of his life being shortened. And not just for every negative word that he uttered, but for all of the words that Paro uttered, because he caused Paro to question him. Oh, how old are you? You look really old. He caused Paro to fall into a negative place of thinking, wow, how old is he? What has he gone through? He gets punished for those too. Now I have to ask you, where we everything that happens in the Torah we're supposed to learn from, and it's supposed to be applicable to me. And so if everything negative that I say, does it actually cause my life to be shortened? And does it cause my life to be shortened by a full year for every negative word I say? Clearly not. Is it like diluted based on Yaakov was a big tzaddik, and so therefore by me it's like relative to my level of how righteous I am, then my life is shortened? And the answer is that being negative and complaining, whereas it's not each word is going to shorten us by a certain amount, but that being negative causes us to lose life. It causes it in a very real scientific way. We know that people who are under more stress, that people who have anxiety, that people who tend to always be scared and worried, that they tend to live less happy lives and less life. In fact, there's a famous story of this patient who recovers from a terrible, terrible illness, and he makes a Sudat Hodah. And at his Sudat Hodah, he invites the doctor. And at this Sudat Hodah, thanking Hashem for his recovery, he gets up in front of everyone and he says, and I owe my life to Hashem, and his messenger was this doctor. And he goes on to tell everybody, I was behind the curtain, and everything looked bleak. Everyone said there was no hope for me. And then I heard this doctor talking about me to someone else. And he said, you know, his chances are actually very good. And this and that and the other. And he started saying how I do have a chance to live. And when I heard this doctor say that, when the nurse came in and looked downward, when the other guys came in, I had this doctor's words in my mind. If he thought that there were good chances for me to get better, I knew I was going to fight and take advantage of those chances. And so I really owe my life to this doctor. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for believing that I could be saved. The doctor turns crimson, and the doctor says, my dear friend, I remember that day talking behind your curtain, but I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about the patient next to you. I too believed that you had no chance of survival. And everyone understood that what gave this man the ability to survive was his positive attitude. Hashem sent him to overhear that doctor speaking about someone else because that was what was going to save him. His mindset, how he felt about things, how his mind was going to navigate the situation, staying with the positive, being with the positive. Sometimes we have to wait for our Yeshua, for our salvation to come. Sometimes we end up having to wait a long time. And the longer that we have to wait, some people are lucky. They get everything boom, 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 boom on a silver platter, or so it seems to the rest of us watching them. And for some people, there's more of a wait till you see the salvation. Obviously, for Klal Yisrael on a whole, we're waiting and waiting till we can greet Mashiach and see God's glory fully revealed in this world. But I heard a mashal today about from a friend of mine, Miral, and she told me this mashal. When we're waiting for a salvation, when we're waiting for a Yeshua, it can be compared to somebody waiting for a train. So if you want to catch this train, you have to go to the train station. You're not going to catch the train unless you go to the train station. That's the basic hishtadlus. Now, when you get to the train station, you have one of two options. There's two kinds of people that you see at a train station. You have the person that sits down on the bench, takes out their book, takes out their tehillim, takes out their sewing, takes out their whatever project they're working on, and sits and creates, works, develops. And you have the other type of person that stands at the edge of the platform and keeps looking over, keeps seeing, when is the train going to come now? Is the train going to come now? As if looking for the train is going to make the train come any faster. Now, the train is going to come at the same time for both these people. But the guy who is at the edge of the platform walks onto the train, a bunch of nerves, stressed out, and with nothing in his hands. Whereas the guy on the bench gets onto the train, calm, and with a product of his creativity that he takes onto the train with him. That's how we have to look at those times where we feel stuck, where we feel we're not sure, Hashem, I need help, I need salvation, but it's been so long, but should I give up? Should I lower my expectations? Should I dream big? Hashem, what should I do? Hashem says, go to the train station, regular, normal, hishtadlut, but then sit on the bench and begin to create something. I will send you the salvation. I'll send you the train to pick you up. It's going to come. Hashem, Hayad Hashem Tiktzar. It doesn't matter if even, I have to send a train coming backwards for you. Hashem can do anything. I will send you the train, but don't waste your time wringing your hands in anxiety, looking to see when is it going to come? When is it going to come? Sit with certainty and create something to bring onto the train with you. Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky brings a mashal of the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai writes that there was once a carpenter living in Israel, and he was a very, very honest carpenter, worked with wood, and every time he would make some money, he would keep some of the money, and a little bit of the money he would put away for his old age. And he hid it in a spot in his house that he was sure nobody would ever find it. And so every time he would get a sum of money, he would keep whatever he needed to live, and he would always put aside in this hiding place that he was sure nobody would ever find, so that he could live off of it in his old age. Well, lo and behold, his neighbor had a window, unbeknownst to him, that was able to look into that area where his hiding spot was. And the neighbor one day notices him moving things around. He's looking out the window, notices moving things around, taking a sack, putting a sack, and the neighbor begins to realize there's a pattern over here. And after a few years, the neighbor understands this man is saving up money, and he has money over there that he is keeping for his retirement. Well, years go by, the two neighbors together, and one day this old elder carpenter decides that he is going to go with his wife for Shabbos away somewhere. The neighbor realizes this is his chance. He sneaks into his neighbor's house, goes exactly to where the hiding place is, moves the things around that he has watched already countless times of exactly how his neighbor gets there, and finds the sack of money, opens it up, and it is a large sum of money after all of these years. The neighbor realizes he can't stay in town. Eventually, it's going to, the carpenter is going to realize that he's been robbed, and there's going to be a search, and where is he going to, how is he going to have all of this money all of a sudden? He realizes he needs to leave this town, go somewhere where nobody knows him, and live out the rest of his life in the lap of luxury. And so he begins to travel to go down south towards Eilat. And as he is traveling through the Midbar, he gets lost. He gets lost in the desert. And, he knew that he had this perfect sense of direction, and he just gets lost. And he's not sure what to do. He's searching desperately to find his way, but he's just getting more and more lost until all of his provisions have run out, and he is lost in the wilderness. And he realizes he's going to die. He wants to now try and call for help, but he doesn't want anybody to find the money on him. So he hides the money. He finds this big log that had just fallen in the wilderness, and he, finds a way to put the money inside this log. And he starts to run around screaming for help. Somebody help me, maybe a Bedouin, somebody will find him. Help me. Nobody hears him, and he dies in the desert. Well, the carpenter comes home, realizes that he's been robbed. What can he do? His whole life savings is taken. What can he do? He continues his honest work and prays to Hashem to help him in his old age. Time passes by, and there is a young man traveling from the south back into Yerushalayim to try to do some work in order to earn a living. As he is coming up to Yerushalayim, he passes by this beautiful log of wood that seems to be so good for carpentry. And he picks it up and he says, you know what, I'm going to find something to do with this when I get into the city. Comes into the city and he asks around, is there a carpenter? Is there somebody that I could do something with this wood? And everybody tells him, yes, go to the carpenter. He's wonderful. He's honest. He comes to the carpenter and he says, I'd like to, would you like this wood? Do you need this wood? And the carpenter sees it. It's beautiful wood. He says, of course, I'll buy it from you. And the young man says, actually, I don't know how to do anything. I'm looking for a job. I would be willing to give this piece of wood to you if you would train me so that I can then have this kind of, as an apprentice, so I can have this as my trade. And the old man says, of course, no problem. And they begin to work together. And eventually they're commissioned with some project. And they say, oh, that wood would be perfect for it. They go to his stockroom. They cut open the log. And of course, what do they find? All of the carpenter's money in its original sack. And the carpenter says, yo, Hashem sent it back to me. I can't believe it. And he hugs the young boy who he's now become very close with. And he tells him, listen, I need to give you some of this as reward money. You brought this back to me. And the young man says, no, I don't want to take anything for it. Anyhow, they work together for a few more months until the young man says, okay, I've learned the trade and I'm ready to go back to my parents and to practice this trade in the city that I come from. So he says, listen, please let me give you some of this reward money. I send it off with you. And the young man refuses staunchly. He did it for L'Shem Shemaim. He had no problem with it. And he starts his travels back. Before he leaves, this man tells his wife, the carpenter tells his wife, he's not accepting money. We have to figure out a way to give him the money. His wife was she used to make the most beautiful loaves of bread. And he said, let's bake him a loaf of bread. And in the middle of the bread, we'll put the money. That way, when he gets back to his family, he will be able to open it up and see that there is money inside, and he deserves it. It was his. He was the one who brought it back to me. Fine, that's what they do. And it was a beautiful loaf and very intricately designed. She was a professional, and they gift it to him as they part, and they say, we hopefully one day we'll see you again, etc., etc. As this young man is walking back home, traveling back home, lo and behold, he gets mugged. He gets stuck up by a robber who says, give me all your money. The young man doesn't have much money on him. All he did was learn the trade, and he refused to take any money. And so he's searching through his pouch and his sack, and he sees there's really nothing, but there's this beautiful loaf of bread. So the man says, okay, I'm going to take the bread. The young man says, all right. He doesn't realize what he just lost, and he continues on his way. Meanwhile, this robber wants to commission some sort of a piece of wooden furniture. He was hoping that he would mug this young man and get the money for it, but alas, that wasn't the case. And so he travels into the city of Jerusalem, and he goes to the carpenter's house, and he tells the carpenter, I heard that you're a great carpenter. I come from somewhat far, and I wanted you to make this piece of furniture. I don't have any money now, but I was wondering perhaps if you would take this beautiful loaf of bread and accept it as a gift, and I will pay you the rest when it's finished, and I will come to you. The carpenter looks at his wife and realizes this is her loaf of bread and understands exactly what must have happened. He tells the robber, who is his client, sure, no problem. And he takes the loaf of bread from him, and the client leaves, and he says to his wife, look, Hashem wanted us to have this money. He simply wanted us to have it. That's why it kept coming back to us. Yosef tells his brothers, Ve'ata, and now al ta'atzvu, don't be sad, because Hashem sent me hena. Hashem sent me here. It wasn't you. Hashem sent me here. Don't be sad because I wasn't sad. Everywhere that I was, when I was in Potiphar's house as a slave, when I was in the jail, when I was in the bottom of the pit that you put me, and here is the viceroy of Egypt, I knew that Hashem sent me here. And if I was here and Hashem sent me here, I wasn't sad because Hashem knows what he's doing. He has a plan bigger than you and me. You thought you were stopping me from the fulfillment of my dreams, but your actions, they are what catapulted my dreams into motion. Yehuda, when you thought, you know what, enough is enough, I made enough mistakes in the past, now I'm going to stand up to this non-Jewish viceroy and right my wrongs. You thought you were doing the right thing. You actually pulled your sword to Yosef, to your brother. God knows better. It's okay, maybe, to be confused. Maybe we can look at our confusion not as something that's torturing us, not as something that's threatening to pull me down and make me bitter and angry and resentful to the world or to Hashem Chalila. But perhaps confusion is giving me an opportunity to expand my emunah muscles, to expand my perception of what God is capable of doing. Ura'ita et achorai, upanai lo yareu. God tells us, you will see me from the back, not from the front. I might be in a state of suffering right now. It might be difficult, bleak, dark, confusing, sad, but it's part of a bigger plan. I know it's going to be good. I have to do what I have to do in whatever challenge I'm in right now. I have to show up at the proverbial train station, but then I'm going to sit on the bench and start to create something that I'm going to take with me onto the train when it comes, because it's going to come. Hayad Hashem tiktzar. Chas v'sholom is God's hand short. He's limitless. But we do know, she'ein simcha ela hatarat hasfekot. There's no such thing as true joy until all of my doubts have been reconciled. How do I get to that place? Where is that place where all doubts are reconciled? So something very interesting happens in the Parsha. Yosef reveals himself to all of his brothers, and especially to his brother Binyamin. They haven't seen each other in decades. Each one, they're the two brothers of their mother. They've been separated since childhood. They hug each other and fall on each other's necks, and they begin to cry. And Rashi tells us, what are they crying about? Not about the years that they lost from one another, not about all of the suffering, not about the loss of their shared mother. They're crying, each one, because they see in Ruach HaKodesh the destruction of the Mishkan, the destruction of the temple. They're crying over the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Now that is really lofty and really special, but these are brothers that haven't seen each other in decades. That's what they are thinking about right now, the loss of the Mishkan, the loss of the Beis HaMikdash. Why is that what they're crying about? We heard from Rabbi Paznik that we know Yosef sends wagons to Yaakov. And Yaakov, when he sees the wagons, that's the sign that it is really Yosef. And not that Yosef is alive physically, but that Yosef is alive spiritually. And usually we learn the famous way of understanding it is that, oh, the wagons, because the last thing they learned was Egla Arufa, the cow. And so the wagons are this symbol of what they were learning last. But it's an agala, it's a wagon. It's not an Egla, it's actually a wagon. So what were these wagons? What was the wagon that Yaakov was comforted from? And so he brings a chazal that says the wagon was an allusion to the wagons that the Nesiim brought in the Chanukat HaMishkan. We just read it over Hanukkah. In the Chanukat HaMishkan, in the bringing in for the Mishkan, the Nesiim, each one brought gifts. And amongst the gifts, there were 6 wagons, but there were 12 Nesiim. Why only 6? Because, say Chazal, the Nesiim teamed up. 2 Shvatim together brought 1 wagon. 2 became 1. There was Achdus. There was unity. That's how the Mishkan was built. It was built upon the foundation of oneness, of unity. Yosef and Binyamin see each other. They realize that all of the suffering that they've gone through these years was because of the lack of brotherly unity. When the Shvatim threw Yosef into the pit, that's what caused this whole coming down to Egypt. And they cry about the Mishkan and the temple because the source of all our sadness, the source of all Jewish suffering and tragedy is when we lose sight of echad, of achdut, of oneness between us and our fellow Jews, us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, us and the Torah. And in fact, the Haftorah of Parshat Vayigash, it's incredible. It's from Yecheskel. You'll notice it, or you'll read through it. It has the word echad over and over again. You have to look through it. Vayihi dvar Hashem elai lemor. Yecheskel is saying, God appears to me. Ve'ata ben adam, take etz echad, uchtov alav, take one tree and write on it Yehuda, ulevnei Yisrael chavarav, ulekach etz echad, uketov alav, ukarav otam echad el echad, lecha leetz echad, v'hayu la'achadim beyadecha. Tell them, and when they ask you, Hine ani lokeach et etz Yosef asher biyad Ephraim, and I'm putting them together, le'etz echad, v'hayu echad biyadi. And I can go through it. It's like every other pasuk says the word echad, if not once, twice, 3 times. The entire Haftorah keeps repeating the word echad. The whole coming down to Egypt is because we lacked achdus. What's a suffix? What's a doubt? A doubt is when we don't know. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, where we don't see that it's all really unity. We think there's good and there's bad in this world. I'm confused because I don't know which one is which. Hello, it's all Echad. If I understand that there's unity, if I can reach over the fence to somebody who might be different than me, they might have a different opinion than I do, but I can be unified with them. I'm allowed to disagree with people, but I love you like a brother, but I believe in you and I'll encourage you and I'll be there for you, even if we have different of opinions or we have different of ways to do it. That's how we bring the Beis HaMikdash. And bringing the Beis HaMikdash, that's what gives us our ultimate clarity. And Yosef and Binyamin cry over the lack of unity. We might be unified now, but will we be able to maintain it? And so when we ask ourselves how to deal with feelings of confusion, how to overcome uncertainty in our life, perhaps we can take upon ourselves to commit an act of unity, something that will bring people together, that will bring Klal Yisrael together, maybe something that will bring Jews closer to one another, or to bring a Jew closer to his Father in heaven. But to have kavana in a time of uncertainty, I need to create achdus, unity, so I can get to echad. And to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu that when Mashiach comes, in whichever way he's going to come, that we shouldn't stand there speechless, stunned into silence, because we said, oh my gosh, I can't, I never thought God would have been able to do this. May we daven that Hashem should be able to expand our understanding of his limitless, of his infinite, unboundaried koach in this world. And please God, may we see his infinite power and koach with everyone experiencing simcha, clarity, Mashiach Tzidkenu. Shabbat Shalom.